Hello everyone and welcome back to RealFear Files. Today I am sharing 9 chilling horror accounts from the deepest shadows of Oregon. From cursed towns and baffling vanishings to experiences that defy all reason. These are not myths or stories passed down. These are true accounts from people who endured the unimaginable and survived to reveal their experiences. Each story you are about to hear has been carefully examined and documented, drawn from personal accounts, historical archives, and verified events that continue to disturb the Pacific Northwest. To protect the privacy of those involved, some names and identifying details have been altered, but the fear remains entirely real. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to RealFear Files for daily, authentic horror stories that will keep you awake long after the video ends. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a glimpse when darkness comes knocking. I have a memory that still makes my hands tremble whenever I dwell on it too long. My name is Ayana, and I teach high school history. Back in 2018, I relocated to Lafayette, Oregon, expecting a quiet, picturesque small town where I could focus on teaching and perhaps finally write that book I had postponed for years. The town appeared ideal. Tree-lined streets, charming historic buildings, friendly neighbors who waved as you passed. Yet there was something no one mentioned when I signed the lease. Something the real estate agent conveniently omitted. Lafayette had burned to the ground twice before. According to a legend tracing back to the 1850s, it was destined to burn a third time. I know what you're thinking. Curses aren't real. They're simply stories people invent to explain misfortune or coincidence. That is exactly what I believed. Until I began digging into my new town's past and realized that some accounts were too precise, too consistent, and too unsettling to be dismissed as folklore. It began innocently enough. I was at the local library gathering material for my American history class when I discovered a section devoted to Lafayette's history. There were old photographs of the town from the 19th century, yellowed newspaper clippings, and a thick binder labeled Fire Records. Curious, I pulled it out, wondering what kind of fire history a town this small could have. That's when I noticed the pattern. The first fire struck on October 31st, 1857. It ignited simultaneously in 3 places: the courthouse, the town square, and a residential street on the east side. The entire town was consumed in under 4 hours. 17 people died. The second fire erupted on October 31st, 1904. Exactly 47 years later. Once again, 3 points of origin. Again, the town was reduced to ashes. This time, 23 residents lost their lives. Sitting there in the library, reading the records, a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. Both fires on Halloween. Both starting in 3 places at the same time. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. I kept investigating. Hidden in the back of the binder was a photocopied page from what looked like an extremely old journal. The handwriting was barely readable, but I could decipher enough to understand the account. In 1852, a woman, whose name was never recorded, was accused of witchcraft by the town council. That detail would prove crucial later. This unnamed woman was charged with witchcraft. The accusations were standard for that era. Unexplained illnesses, failing crops, livestock dying mysteriously. Her trial lasted less than a single day. She was found guilty and sentenced to hang. According to the journal entry, written by a witness to the execution, She stood on the gallows entirely calm. She neither cried nor begged for mercy. Instead, she faced the crowd gathered to watch her die and spoke with clarity. "You burn me with your lies," she said, "so I will burn you with truth. This town will burn 3 times. Once for my body, once for my name, once for my soul. And when the 3rd fire occurs, none of you will be able to prevent it." Then they executed her. According to the witness, she smiled as the noose tightened around her neck. I photocopied the page and brought it home. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept mulling over the dates. 1857, 1904. If the pattern continued, the 3rd fire should have occurred around 1951, maybe 1998. Yet, there had been no 3rd fire. Not yet. I tried to convince myself that meant the curse had been broken, or was never real at all. But I couldn't shake the sense that I was overlooking something vital. The next day I visited Lafayette Cemetery. I'm not normally the kind of person who goes to graveyards for fun, but I needed to see if the witch was buried there. I needed something tangible, something that would make this feel less like a ghost story and more like history. I walked among rows of worn headstones, reading names and dates from the 1800s, until I found a grave that had clearly been disturbed recently. The soil around it was loose, fresh. Someone had dug here. The marker was simple, only a date. 1852. No name, no epitaph, just the year of death. I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures to document everything. That's when I noticed the smell. Smoke. Not the comforting kind from a campfire, but a harsh chemical odor of something burning that shouldn't be burning. I looked around. There was no visible smoke, no fire, nothing to explain the scent. Yet it was so strong my eyes began watering. I left the cemetery quickly, unnerved in a way I hadn't felt since childhood, afraid of the dark. When I returned to my apartment, the scent followed me. Smoke lingered in my living room, bedroom, and even my car. I inspected every appliance, every outlet, every potential source. Nothing. I called the landlord. He came, walked through the apartment, and looked at me as though I'd lost my mind. "I don't smell anything," he said, and he was telling the truth. I could see it in his expression. Whatever I smelled, it existed only for me. Over the next week, other residents began reporting the same phenomenon. Smoke where there was no fire. It began with a few people, then a dozen, then dozens. The fire department was called repeatedly. They found nothing. No gas leaks, no faulty wiring, no blaze. But the odor persisted, growing stronger. I returned to the library and delved deeper into the town's archives. That's when I discovered something that chilled me completely. The witch's curse had a specific condition. The 3rd fire would ignite when her grave was disturbed. I thought of the loose soil I had seen at the cemetery. Someone had recently dug her grave. Perhaps treasure hunters. Perhaps vandals. Or someone ignorant of the danger. But the reason didn't matter. What mattered was that the curse had been triggered. I tried to warn the townspeople. I attended the council meeting and presented everything I had uncovered. The clippings, the journal entry, the fire patterns, the disturbed grave. They listened politely but dismissed me. "Miss Cruz," the mayor said, using my last name as if to sound authoritative. "We appreciate your interest in history. But Lafayette isn't going to burn because of a 170-year-old curse. Those fires were tragic, but they were also a product of their time. Wooden buildings, poor fire safety, no modern equipment. We have sprinklers now. We have building codes. We are completely safe. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted them to understand that this was not about fire safety or regulations. This was something older, darker, beyond anything they were willing to acknowledge. But I could see that their minds were already made up. I was the crazy new teacher obsessed with ghost stories. That was October 29th. I had 2 days. October 30th was spent trying to figure out what to do. I could not compel the town to take me seriously. I could not evacuate people on my own authority. All I could do was prepare. I packed a bag with essentials, filled my car with gas, and memorized every exit route out of Lafayette. And I was not the only one. I noticed others doing the same. Loading vehicles with belongings, checking fire extinguishers, keeping phones charged. Word had spread despite council dismissal. People were terrified. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in my living room, lights on, watching the clock toward midnight. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. It was my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, a lifelong Lafayette resident. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice trembling. I went to my window and looked outside. People stood in yards and streets, all gazing in the same direction. Toward the town center, a woman stood in the middle of the intersection. She wore a long dress from the 1850s, like those in history books, and she was on fire. Not screaming, not running, just burning. But the flames did not touch her. They hovered around her like an aura, flickering and dancing, never reaching her skin. She turned slowly, looking at each house, each observer. When her eyes met mine, even from a distance, I felt it. A crushing weight pressed on my chest, a cold that had nothing to do with the October air. Then she raised her hand, pointing in 3 directions. The old courthouse site, the town square, and the residential area where I lived. At exactly midnight, fire alarms blared throughout the town. Every building in Lafayette. Then, the fire began. Flames erupted from a house 2 blocks away. Then, another at the old courthouse, converted into a museum. Then a third near the town square, simultaneously. Just like 1857, just like 1904. I grabbed my bag and ran to my car. Streets were chaos. People were fleeing. Fire trucks arrived from neighboring towns. Sirens screamed. I drove to the outskirts and parked on a hill to watch everything. Lafayette was ablaze. The 3rd fire had come, but then something unusual occurred. The fires did not spread. They burned intensely at their origin points but did not jump to other buildings. Firefighters contained them quickly, far faster than should have been possible. By 3 a.m., all 3 fires were extinguished. The destruction was significant, but not catastrophic. A few buildings destroyed, but no deaths, no injuries. The town had survived. The next day, November 1st, the fire marshal was already investigating. I overheard him speaking to his team. All three fires had begun due to unexplainable electrical surges. The affected buildings were the original courthouse site, the exact location of the gallows in 1852, and the land where the witch's childhood home had once stood. The fire marshal could not explain the surges. There was no storm, no power failure, no faulty wiring. Electricity had simply appeared out of nowhere, as though lightning had struck from the ground up. I returned to the cemetery one last time. The witch's grave was still there, still disturbed. But something new had appeared. A single word had been carved into the headstone. Fresh, as if done overnight or by some unseen hand. The word read, 3. I moved out of Lafayette 2 weeks later. I could not remain there. Not after what I had witnessed. Not after realizing that the curse was real, that it had been real all along, and that we had somehow survived it by the narrowest of margins. But I often wonder if we truly did survive it. The curse claimed the town would burn 3 times. It did. But what it did not reveal was, what happens after the 3rd fire? What comes next? What was the purpose of the curse if not to destroy Lafayette completely? I still drive past Lafayette occasionally. I have to. It is on the way to visit my family. Each time I do, I check my rearview mirror. Not for cars, for smoke. Because I have this haunting feeling that the 3rd fire was not the end. It was merely the beginning of something worse. The witch said the 3rd fire would be for her soul. Yet I never discovered what became of her spirit after her death. Where did it go? Does it remain in Lafayette, waiting? The town council never acknowledged the event. They labeled it a freak accident. 3 simultaneous electrical fires on Halloween night. Unusual, but explainable. Except, it wasn't explainable. Not truly. And those who lived through it know the truth, even if they never voice it. There is one more detail I uncovered after moving away. While researching 19th century witch trials for a paper, I came across information that almost made me drop my laptop. In cases of witchcraft execution, the accused's name was meant to be recorded in the church registry, even if found guilty. It was law. But the Lafayette witch never had her name recorded. Someone had deliberately erased it. In folklore, erasing a name is the worst curse one can inflict. It means they cannot rest. It means the soul remains trapped, unable to move on, unable to find peace. That woman who was hanged in 1852, whoever she was, is still present, still angry, still potent. And now I understand what she meant when she said the town would burn 3 times. Once for her body, destroyed. Once for her name, erased. And once for her soul, trapped. The 3rd fire was meant to release her. But I do not believe it did. I think it simply reminded her that she remains, still suffering, still capable of exacting retribution on Lafayette. So, yes, Lafayette burned 3 times. The curse reached its conclusion. But if you ever drive through that small Oregon town, especially in October, Pay attention to the air because smoke lingers long after the flames have died. And some fires never truly end. They merely wait for the precise moment to flare again. Every time I pass Lafayette, I breathe in the faintest hint of smoke and feel a shiver. Some flames, once lit, never fade completely. They linger in memory, in air, and in the earth. And I know, somewhere beneath the surface, the witch waits, her power undiminished, her anger unresolved. It is a reminder that some histories do not remain in the past. They haunt the present, silently, patiently, and sometimes, terrifyingly, they return. The town survived the fire, but the curse's echo continues, and I am certain that it is not finished. Not by a long shot. So, if you find yourself driving through Lafayette in October, watch the sky, watch the streets, and most importantly, notice the smell lingering in the air. It is a warning, a whisper, a presence. The fires came 3 times, as promised. But the story, the pain, the lingering dread, those are still very much alive. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest part of all. I want to share something that happened to me during the summer of 2019. Before I begin, you should know this. I'm not the kind of person who gets caught up in ghost tales or local legends. My name is Sedona. I work as a surgical nurse, and my life revolves around evidence, facts, and logic. But what I experienced that night on Highway 101 defies explanation. I've spent years trying to rationalize it, and I still can't. All I can do is recount what occurred, and you can draw your own conclusions. It was late July, close to 1 a.m., and I was heading home from a party on the beach in Cannon Beach. My friend Mia was asleep in the passenger seat, completely out of it. She had drunk far too much, so I was the responsible driver, which didn't bother me at all. The stretch of Highway 101 I was traveling is beautiful, even under the cloak of night, the ocean glimmering faintly to one side, dense, shadowy forests on the other, and the winding roads carved along the coast with breathtaking views. I'd driven this path countless times. I knew every twist, every marker by heart. By midnight, fog had begun rolling in, typical for the Oregon coast in summer, but heavy, clinging fog that cut visibility down to maybe 50 feet. I eased my speed and switched on the fog lights, moving cautiously. Traffic was non-existent. I hadn't seen another vehicle in 20 minutes. Just Mia, snoring lightly, and the mist closing in from all directions. I was roughly 15 miles south of Cannon Beach when something appeared on the road ahead. At first, I assumed it was debris, maybe a fallen branch, or even a deer. The fog distorted shapes, turning ordinary objects into twisted, unrecognizable forms. I slowed further, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. That's when it moved. It stood upright. My heart sank, my pulse spiking. It was a person, but not like any person I've ever seen. Completely wrapped from head to toe in tattered bandages. Grimy and stained, the figure resembled a mummy from a horror film. Grayish wrappings caught in my headlights. It didn't flinch, didn't shift. Just stood there in my lane, staring at me. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded slightly, stopping maybe 20 feet from the figure. We sat frozen, staring at each other through the windshield. Then the smell reached me. Even with the windows rolled up, the air circulation on recirculate, It pierced through. The stench of decaying flesh, gangrenous wounds, the unmistakable scent of necrotic tissue. Death. I know that smell all too well from my work in the hospital, but this was worse. So much worse. I made a snap decision. I veered sharply left, trying to get around the figure, but as soon as I moved, it lunged at the car. Its bandaged hand slammed against Mia's side window, just inches from her face. The force was enough to wake her instantly. She opened her eyes, saw that grotesque, bandaged face so close, and screamed. I mashed the accelerator. The car fishtailed on the damp road but regained traction, surging forward. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I expected the figure to fade into the fog, but it didn't. It chased us. Fast. Faster than any human could possibly run. 40 miles per hour, 50, 60. Still it kept pace. Its strides were unnaturally long, smooth and relentless, closing ground at a speed no ordinary person could manage. Mia was hyperventilating beside me, making shallow, panicked gasps. I pressed the gas pedal further, pushing 70, then 75 miles per hour along fog-shrouded, twisting coastal roads. It was insane, risky, dangerous, yet the terror of what was behind us outweighed any fear of an accident. Eventually, I noticed it starting to lag. Slowly, it receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking into the mist until the fog swallowed it entirely. Still, I didn't let off the accelerator. I kept the car flying for another 10 miles before I dared to ease up. My hands shook violently, gripping the wheel as if my life depended on it. Because it did. "What was that?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling from her earlier scream. "What the hell was that?" I had no answer, none that made sense. I just drove, eyes darting for any sign of lights or civilization. Finally, we pulled into a gas station in Walport, barely 20 miles past where the encounter began. I parked under the brightest lights I could find and shut off the engine. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We sat in silence, catching our breath, trying to process the impossible events we'd just endured. Then Mia tapped the glass. "Sedona, look." On the passenger window was a handprint, large, unmistakable, pressed from the outside. But it wasn't ordinary. The print was smeared with a yellowish-brown substance, thick and sticky, almost like pus or some kind of infected discharge. And the odor. It was back, stronger, more pungent than before. The smell of rot and decay that made my stomach turn. We stepped out of the car to inspect it closer. The handprint was real, solid, tangible, evidence of something that had physically touched my car. I grabbed a napkin from the glove compartment to wipe it, but the substance clung stubbornly, refusing to budge. Even after wiping, the smell remained, saturating my hands. A woman appeared at the station, middle-aged with weary eyes. She looked at the window and visibly paled. "You saw him, didn't you?" she said, flat, matter-of-fact. Not a question. "The what?" I asked. She gestured for us to come inside. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, she began explaining. In the 1950s, there had been a logger in the area near Cannon Beach. He suffered a horrific accident. Accounts varied, but the outcome was always the same. His body, heavily bandaged, vanished from the hospital before treatment concluded. No one ever found him. Some said he died in the forest. Others claimed he succumbed to infection-induced madness. By the 1960s, local lore spoke of sightings of a bandage man, a figure fully wrapped, appearing along Highway 101 late at night, attacking lone travelers' vehicles. The stories were consistent. The stench of rot, the impossible speed, yellow-brown handprints left on glass. The attendant had been there 15 years. Every month someone would come in, terrified, telling the same story. "You're lucky," she said quietly. "Some don't make it." She retrieved a folder from a filing cabinet. Polaroids spilled from it, dozens of them. Cars with handprints just like mine. Some scratched, some dented. Signs of violent contact. A few images even showed the bandage man himself, blurry and wrapped in gray linen, looming in the road or lurking in the background. "These," she said, "are real. Police won't touch them. They dismiss it as folklore, but I know better. He's real. And he's getting more aggressive." She played security footage from recent weeks, cars arriving between midnight and 3 a.m., coming from Cannon Beach, all with identical handprints on the windows. Drivers crying, trembling, recounting the same chase, the same smell, the same impossible speed. Mia and I realized we couldn't drive any further that night. Terrified, we checked into a modest motel just across from the gas station. But the odor clung to us. Scrubbing our hands, showering, nothing erased it. It lingered faintly, embedded in our skin. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a noise. Slow, deliberate scratching at our motel door. My stomach dropped. I crept to the peephole, heart hammering. There he stood, the bandage man, just outside, facing our room. I could make out the filthy wrappings, the uneven stains, the way the cloth hung loose in places, hinting at the decaying body beneath. I stepped back and shook Mia awake. "He's here," I whispered. Her eyes flew open, terror clear in her expression. We tried calling the front desk. Silence. I dialed 911. No connection. The signal was gone. With no other choice, we pushed the dresser and chair against the door, barricading ourselves. The scratching continued, methodical, patient, almost calculated. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like he had all the time in the world. Hours passed this way. We sat on the bed, backs pressed against the wall, listening to the scratching, enduring that nauseating odor which intensified as the night dragged on. Eventually, exhaustion overcame our terror. I must have dozed intermittently, my mind flickering between sleep and terror. When dawn finally came, silence fell. The scratching had stopped. Mia was asleep, curled beside me. The room was quiet, deceptively normal. I inched toward the door, moving the furniture away carefully. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. No bandage man, no trace of him, only the empty hallway. I opened the door cautiously, expecting some trap, but there was nothing. Except for the door itself. Deep, fresh gouges marred the wood, scratches that hadn't been there the night before. We checked out immediately. The motel manager looked at the marks without surprise. "Happens sometimes," he said vaguely. "I'll add it to your bill." Like it was routine, like supernatural destruction was just a minor expense. The stench clung to my car for months. I tried everything: professional detailing, industrial odor eliminators, ozone treatments. Nothing worked. The handprint on the window would not come off. The strange substance had somehow fused with the glass. In the end, I had to replace the entire window. The mechanic asked what had caused it, and when I explained, he only nodded knowingly, as if he'd heard the story before. I began researching the incident after that night. The logging accident was said to have occurred in 1952. The man's name had been erased from records following a lawsuit. The company claimed he had fallen into machinery and been swept into the sea. Yet, co-workers maintained he was alive when wrapped in bandages, screaming in agony and begging for relief. Instead, he was placed in a truck bound for the hospital and disappeared somewhere along Highway 101. The truck reached the hospital with bloodstains in the back, but no patient. Reports of the bandage man started surfacing in local newspapers in the mid-1960s. Initially, these were treated as novelties, seasonal stories for Halloween. But the accounts persisted. Year after year, decade after decade, always the same stretch of highway, always late at night, always the same description. A bandaged figure, the stench of decay, impossible speed, yellow-stained handprints. Now, I avoid Highway 101 entirely. I take the inland roads, longer and less scenic, just to steer clear of that stretch. Mia moved out of Oregon altogether. She refuses to discuss what happened. When I try, she diverts the conversation or leaves. It's as though she's trying to erase it from memory, hoping time will dissolve the terror. But I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that wrapped face. In my nightmares, I smell that same decaying stench. And I keep thinking about what the gas station attendant said. That we were lucky. Some people never get away. What happened to those others? Where are they now? Are they wandering the fog along Highway 101, wrapped in bandages, doomed to hunt for eternity? I don't know. I have no answers, only questions, and a lingering dread. The bandage man is still out there, somewhere, waiting. He is still chasing, still hunting. The worst part? I don't think his intent is violence. I think he wants company. To make others like him, trapped in bandages, condemned to eternal suffering, unable to die. That is the emptiness I glimpsed in his eyes when he pressed his face against Mia's window. Not hatred. Loneliness. He doesn't want to be alone anymore. And that is far more terrifying than anything else I've ever encountered. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't drive on Highway 101 without feeling my stomach drop, my pulse spike, every nerve screaming at me. The memories replayed constantly. The fog pressing in, the headlights catching the tattered bandages, the grotesque handprint on the window. Even in broad daylight, I felt its presence, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. I avoided discussing it in detail, even with friends I trusted. Most people would have dismissed it, chalked it up to fatigue, alcohol, or stress. But I know what I saw, I know what I smelled, and the evidence remained. The handprint on my car, the lingering odor, the scratches in the motel door, those things were real. Tangible proof that something inexplicable had existed, something that defied logic and reason. Mia and I drifted apart after that summer. She couldn't handle the memories, couldn't face the thought that the bandage man might still be out there. She left Oregon entirely, starting over hundreds of miles away. I couldn't leave. This was home, my life, my work. But every night, as I lay down to sleep, the terror of that encounter returned, vivid and unrelenting. I tried to rationalize it, to find an explanation grounded in science or psychology. Could it have been a person with a severe disfigurement? A prankster? A hallucination caused by exhaustion and stress? No. The speed, the physical evidence, the impossibility of what I witnessed. It all ruled out any conventional explanation. And the gas station attendant's collection of Polaroids, the reports she'd shown us, the security footage, all confirmed that others had seen the same thing, experienced the same horror. Years went by. Each summer I would hear whispers from locals about new encounters. Cars stopped at the roadside, handprints appearing on windows, drivers panicked, sometimes injured. A slow, inevitable legend had grown around Highway 101. And yet, even with all the accounts, the authorities treated it as fiction. They dismissed it as folklore, a spooky story for tourists. But I knew better. I had survived it firsthand. Sometimes, I still drive near the coast at night for work emergencies or personal errands, taking inland detours wherever possible. But I never go out alone after dark. I never travel the stretch of Highway 101 where it happened. My car remains meticulously clean, but I always check for any new marks, any suspicious stains, any sign that the bandage man has followed me again. On the anniversaries of that night, I find myself unable to sleep. My dreams are filled with fog, with headlights cutting through the darkness, with the sound of that figure running, always keeping pace, never tiring. The smell of decay invades my subconscious, and I wake up gagging, disoriented, drenched in sweat. I have tried to warn others, but it's difficult. People think I'm exaggerating, imagining, seeking attention. How can you make someone believe something so impossible? How do you prove the existence of a creature that defies every law of nature? A being that leaves evidence but vanishes before it can be captured. It's a story that teeters between horror and disbelief, reality and myth. I still think about the people who weren't lucky, those who didn't escape, the ones the gas station attendant mentioned, the ones we never saw again. What became of them? Are they part of the bandage man's eternal procession, trapped like him, wandering endlessly along fogged roads, seeking victims to join their cursed fate? Or are they gone entirely, erased, consumed by something beyond understanding? Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can feel him there. Not physically, not yet, but somewhere in the fog, watching, waiting. I can almost hear the faintest scratching at the edges of my awareness, a reminder that he still exists, still hunts, still searches. I have tried to move on, to put the event behind me. Therapy helped a little, but the memories are stubborn. The smell, the sight, the panic, it is etched into my mind permanently. I can't scrub it away. I can't forget the terror in Mia's eyes when she saw that face inches from her own. The helplessness. The realization that we were not dealing with something human, something bound by normal limitations. Friends ask why I don't simply avoid the highway entirely, why I continue to live here, why I expose myself to potential risk. The truth is, I cannot live in fear all the time. I have a life, responsibilities, people I care for. But I am cautious, vigilant, hyper-aware of my surroundings whenever night falls. The coast, the fog, the long empty roads, they trigger a reflexive dread I cannot shake. And still there are nights when I wonder, is it truly hunting? Or is it merely seeking companionship? That emptiness I saw in its eyes, the loneliness, the desire not to be alone. It terrifies me far more than any physical threat. The notion that a being could exist, suffering eternally, desperate for connection in a grotesque, twisted form. It is a horror that defies reason. And yet, I experienced it. I saw it. I smelled it. I survived it. I keep thinking about those yellow-brown handprints, the way they marked the car window as if to claim a piece of us. The scratches on the motel door, deliberate and patient, a reminder that it can reach beyond the moment, beyond the space, into our lives and leave a trace of its presence. And I wonder if every scratch, every stain, every rumor is a fragment of a larger story we cannot comprehend. A warning to the unwary travelers of Highway 101. I have tried to live normally. I return to work, care for patients, interact with friends and family. But a part of me remains vigilant, alert to the slightest sound, the faintest movement in the dark. The encounter with the bandage man has altered my perception permanently. The ordinary can no longer be trusted. Shadows may hide horrors beyond imagination. Fog may conceal creatures that defy reality. Roads may lead not to home but to danger. Even now, years later, I cannot shake the feeling that he could return at any moment. Highway 101 remains, as it always has, winding and fog-draped, a corridor for the unknown. The stories continue, the sightings persist, and I know that somewhere out there, the bandage man continues his lonely vigil, searching for company, for someone else to share his endless suffering. I avoid the highway whenever possible, but I cannot stop living my life entirely. The fear is a constant companion, a shadow cast by memory and experience. But I remain alive, and that is something he has not claimed. I carry the handprints, the scratches, the stench, the terror, and the lessons of that night with me every day. And so I tell this story, not for attention, not for disbelief or validation, but as a warning, as a record of what can exist just beyond the edge of reason, a creature of pain and longing, bound by its own suffering, yet terrifyingly real. The bandage man is out there. He moves through the fog. He watches the roads. He waits for the next unlucky traveler. And the more I think about him, the more I understand. He is not purely evil. He is a reflection of pain, of isolation, of the horror of existence without end. Every time I close my eyes, I see that bandaged face. Every time I drive near the coast, my hands grip the wheel tighter. My eyes scan the fog. I smell him sometimes in dreams, lingering in the corners of my mind. And I know that while I survived, the highway claims others. The fog hides the truth. The bandages hide the horror. But it is all there, real and relentless. I do not share this story lightly. I do not do it to scare you. I do it because it happened, because I saw it, and because you should know. Some roads are not safe at night. Some legends are rooted in reality. Some things do exist beyond explanation, and they remember. They wait. They hunt. They long for company in a world that has abandoned them. The bandage man is still out there, still wandering the stretch of Highway 101 where the fog is thickest and the roads are empty. He will not stop. He cannot stop. And the thought of him, alone and desperate, is more terrifying than any rage or violence I've ever known. Loneliness made flesh, bound in decaying bandages, moving faster than reason allows, and always searching. I have learned to live with the fear, to carry it without letting it consume me. But the lesson is clear. Highway 101 is not a road to travel carelessly at night. The fog hides him. The darkness shields him. The bandages are a warning. And the smell is a memory you never truly forget. I still think of Mia sometimes, wondering if she dreams of him, if the memory haunts her like it haunts me. But she chose to escape, to remove herself entirely. I stayed because leaving is not always an option. and because reality is now defined by the coexistence of ordinary life and the knowledge of something impossibly, terrifyingly real. I will never forget the face, the speed, the smell, the scratches, or the handprints. I will never forget the feeling of pure, unfiltered fear. And I will never forget that the bandage man is out there, waiting, hunting, longing, and eternal. Even now I check my mirrors. I glance into foggy shadows, and I remember. And I remain alert. Because I know he might appear again. And next time, maybe, there will be no escape. My name is Canyon, and I need to recount the most terrifying night I've ever experienced. Before I dive in, you need to understand something about me. I am not easily frightened. I've spent 7 years cycling across the country, camping in isolated areas, and traveling solo through places most people avoid. I've faced bears, aggressive dogs, hostile locals, and extreme weather. I thought I had seen everything. I believed I could handle whatever the road threw at me. I was wrong. This all occurred during the summer of 2015. I was biking through Central Oregon along the Cascade Lakes Scenic Byway. The scenery was stunning. Pine forests, towering mountains, and crisp, clean air. I had been planning this route for months, and everything was going smoothly until I chose to stop at Klein Falls State Park. It appeared to be the perfect spot to spend the night. There was a river, picnic tables, and camping was free. I arrived around p.m. just as the sun was starting its descent. Before pitching my tent, I wanted to refill my water bottles. I rode back to the main road, about a mile away, where I had seen a small gas station. The attendant was an older man, likely in his 70s, with a face weathered by a lifetime outdoors. He was helpful, guiding me to the bottled water and engaging in light conversation about my journey. Then, as I paid, he asked where I planned to camp for the night. Klein Falls, I told him. Just for one night. I'll be heading toward Bend tomorrow. His expression shifted instantly. The friendly smile vanished, replaced by something I couldn't interpret. Concern. Maybe even fear. You shouldn't camp there after dark, he said softly, leaning in as if he didn't want anyone else hearing, especially not alone. I asked why, expecting something about bears or petty theft, but he only shook his head. Just trust me. Find another spot, anywhere else. He refused to give details. He repeated the same warning. Do not camp there at night. I left the gas station uneasy, but eventually dismissed his advice as small-town superstition. Everywhere I traveled had similar stories. Haunted places, local legends, or ghost tales. None were ever true. I cycled back to Klein Falls, found a nice spot by the river, and set up my tent. The park was completely deserted. I was the only person there, which should have been my first warning. It was a Friday in July. Perfect weather. Free camping. Yet, no one else was around. I prepared a simple meal on my camp stove, watched the sunset over the river, and crawled into my tent around 10 p.m. I was exhausted from a long day of cycling and fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know when I woke, but it was dark, and something was off. I heard an engine, a truck, far off at first but closing in fast. That alone was strange. The park officially closed at sunset, and no vehicles should have been present after dark. I unzipped my tent slightly to see through the trees. Headlights approached, moving far too quickly for the narrow roads. A sick feeling knotted in my stomach. Those lights weren't wandering, they were coming straight at my campsite. I barely had time to react before the truck crashed through the wooden barrier separating the camping area from the road. I hurled myself from the tent just as it was crushed under the truck's tires. The sickening sound of my bike being shredded echoed through the night. My belongings, my tent, everything was obliterated within seconds. The truck screeched to a halt, engine running, headlights revealing the ruined campsite. The driver's door opened. I froze, lying on the ground where I had landed as a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and in his right hand gleamed a full-sized axe. The blade caught the light as he turned toward me. No words, no demands, no explanation. Just slow, deliberate steps toward me. My survival instincts kicked in. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the only cover, the river. His footsteps followed, steady and unhurried, like he knew he had all the time in the world. I plunged into the Dashes River. Even in July, the water was ice cold, but I didn't care. I waded deeper, submerging myself to my neck, finding a cluster of large rocks about 20 feet from shore. I crouched behind them, barely breathing to avoid detection. From my hiding place, I saw the man reach the riverbank. He paused, sweeping a flashlight across the area. The beam passed over me twice, and each time I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't see me. My heart pounded so hard I feared he could hear it. The water's chill began cramping my muscles, but I stayed still. He lingered there for what felt like an eternity. 5 minutes, 10, perhaps longer. Time ceases to exist when you are sure you are about to die. He patrolled the riverbank, beam sweeping, stopping periodically to listen. I could hear his boots crunch on gravel, heavy, methodical. And then, something worse. He was humming. Low, tuneless, enjoying himself. Finally, the footsteps stopped. The truck door slammed, the engine roared, and then, mercifully, I heard it drive away. I did not move immediately, staying in the river another 20 minutes to ensure he had truly left. My body shook violently, half from cold, half from terror. When I finally climbed out, hypothermia had set in. Lips blue, fingers numb, barely able to stand. I staggered to where my tent had been. All was destroyed. Shredded tent, twisted bike, scattered gear. And embedded deep in a nearby tree trunk was the axe, left behind as a message, a warning. My phone, in my pocket, was ruined. I had no way to call for help. 4 miles from the nearest main road, wet and freezing, I began to walk. I moved cautiously along the park road, then the highway, sticking to ditches whenever headlights passed. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like him. It took almost 2 hours to cover those 4 miles. I stumbled along, hypothermic and in shock. Around 3 a.m. I finally flagged down a semi-truck on Highway 97. The driver took one look at me, soaked, trembling, and immediately pulled over. He wrapped me in a blanket, turned the cab heater up, and drove straight to the Redmond Police Department. The officers who took my statement were professional and attentive, but I noticed a flicker of recognition when I explained what happened at Klein Falls. This wasn't the first story like mine. Detective Morrison, one of the officers, spoke with me after the initial report. He told me something that chilled me to the bone. In 1977, 2 women camping at Klein Falls were attacked late at night by a man with an axe. He said nothing, took nothing, just attacked. Both women survived, but the assailant was never caught. There was no explanation, no leads, nothing. That wasn't an isolated incident. Over the years, campers had reported similar attacks, chased by someone wielding an axe, vehicles damaged, Equipment destroyed. All at Klein Falls. All at night. All matching the same pattern. Detective Morrison explained that every few years, a case like this appeared. Details shifted slightly, but the core remained. A silent attacker, a truck, and an axe. Every attempt to identify a suspect failed. Tire tracks led nowhere. Witness descriptions didn't match anyone. Evidence vanished. It was as if a ghost haunted the park. The next day, police went to Klein Falls to inspect the scene. My campsite was exactly as I had described. Tent shredded, bike ruined, gear scattered. The axe embedded in the tree confirmed my account. The truck tracks led to the main road and vanished. No clues, no trace, nothing. I asked Detective Morrison about the 1977 victims, if they were still alive, and whether I could speak with them. He gave me contact information for one woman, B, who had agreed years earlier to help anyone who went through something similar. The next day, I called her after some rest and borrowing a phone. She was kind but haunted. Her story mirrored mine. Alone at Klein Falls late at night. Truck appears from nowhere. Man with an axe attacks silently. She and her friend had been sleeping in their car and managed to escape, but only after suffering serious injuries. The silence had terrified her more than the violence itself. The attacker never made a sound except for footsteps and the impact of the axe, like a force of nature rather than a human being. B told me something else. She spent years researching Klein Falls, trying to understand why this kept happening. Historical records showed incidents of violence at that location dating back to the 1950s. Attacks, disappearances, deaths, all at night, all involving sharp or heavy tools. It was as if the park itself attracted violence. She suspected the attackers weren't all the same person, but multiple individuals drawn to the spot for reasons no one could explain. I left Oregon the following day. My cycling trip ended abruptly. I bought a bus ticket home to Colorado, trying to leave the experience behind. But memories like that don't fade. The sound of an axe striking a tree where my head had been. The freezing river, crouched behind rocks, while a methodical man hunted me. The humming. I haven't returned to Oregon since. I likely never will. My days of solo cycling are over. Every time I think about camping alone, Klein Falls comes to mind. I recall the gas station attendant's warning that I ignored. I thought experience, preparation, and reason would protect me. I was wrong. Klein Falls State Park remains open. People still camp there. The state lists it as a day-use area, officially closed from sunset to sunrise. Yet there's nothing preventing someone from staying after dark. No gates, no patrols, no cautionary signs about the past incidents. The police file for my case remains open. It is categorized as assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, and destruction of property. There are no suspects, no leads. Just another entry in a decades-long history of unexplained violence at Klein Falls. I keep photos of my destroyed campsite on my computer. Sometimes I review them, searching for a logical explanation. A serial attacker evading capture for 40 years. Or a copycat inspired by prior assaults. Anything rational. But deep down, I know the truth. Whatever stalks Klein Falls, whoever wielded the axe that night is still there. Waiting. Patient. Silent. Methodical. And when the next person ignores the warnings and camps there after dark, it will strike again. Just as it always has. My name is Marisol, and I need to tell you about the day I lost the person I loved more than anyone else. It's been over 7 years, and I still wake up every morning hoping for an answer that never comes. I have no closure, only a terrible certainty that Crater Lake took him, and it has no intention of ever letting him go. It was October 2017 when it happened. My boyfriend Marcus and I had been together for 4 years. We had talked about getting engaged, moving in together. Everything felt right. We'd been planning this trip to Crater Lake National Park for months. It was the off-season, which meant fewer tourists and lower rates. Marcus loved hiking. I loved being outdoors with him. It was supposed to be peaceful. A quiet trip just for us. We arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. The weather couldn't have been better. Clear skies, mild temperatures, not even a breeze. Perfect hiking conditions. We decided to do part of the Rim Trail, about 6 miles, with plans to stop at a scenic overlook for lunch before heading back. Easy, simple, safe. Everything was normal at first. We talked about work, about maybe moving to Portland, about the future. Marcus was relaxed and happy. He kept stopping to take photos of the lake, which looked impossibly blue, like a piece of the sky had fallen into the earth. The cliffs around it were jagged, almost volcanic, and the reflection of the clouds made the whole place look unreal. Around 3 miles in, Marcus suggested leaving the trail, to find a quieter spot, away from the few other hikers we'd passed. I was hesitant. We were supposed to stay on the marked paths, but Marcus was an experienced hiker, calm and careful. If he said it was fine, I trusted him. He told me to stay with our backpacks while he scouted ahead for a place to sit. 10 minutes, he said. 15 at most. Then he walked off between the trees. I sat on a flat rock, pulled out my phone and started scrolling. The signal was weak, but it worked. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then 20. I called his name. No answer. My stomach started tightening. I shouted again, louder this time. Nothing but silence and the sound of wind moving through the trees. I followed the direction he'd gone, calling his name as I walked. The ground was uneven, covered in loose stone and patches of brush. Visibility was bad, 50 feet at most before the land dipped out of view. Then I saw his backpack, sitting on the ground like someone had set it down carefully. His water bottle was clipped to the side, his jacket folded inside. His phone was still there too, fully charged. Everything looked untouched. But Marcus was gone. Panic hit instantly. I yelled for him until my throat hurt. Maybe he'd fallen. There were cliffs not far from the trail. Maybe he was hurt and couldn't call back. I sprinted to the main trail and flagged down a park ranger. She radioed for backup immediately. Within the hour, a full search was underway. Rangers, dogs, volunteers, everyone spreading out through the forest. They searched every inch of the area, every ridge, ravine, slope, and crevice. They found nothing. No footprints beyond where his backpack had been. No broken branches, no torn fabric, no blood. It was like he had just ceased to exist. By nightfall, the rangers brought in helicopters with thermal cameras and more search dogs. I stayed there the whole time, shaking and refusing to leave. I kept thinking any second someone would shout that they'd found him. But nobody did. At around 10 p.m., a ranger came running toward the command tent. They'd found something. Marcus's jacket, half a mile from the backpack site. But it made no sense. It was found in the opposite direction of the cliffs, completely inconsistent with where anyone assumed he'd gone. The strangest part was the dogs. When they brought them to the jacket, they sniffed for a few seconds. Then one of them, a trained German shepherd with years of experience, started whining and refused to move forward. The handler said he'd never seen that dog react like that. Whatever was out there, it scared the animal enough to back away. The search went on through the night, and then the next day, and the next. For 3 weeks, teams scoured the entire region, using drones, sonar, radar, anything that might explain how someone could disappear in broad daylight. They found nothing. No scent, no body, no signs of wildlife dragging anything off. On the 4th day, a ranger named Detective Morrison asked to speak with me privately. She asked if Marcus had been depressed, in debt, or planning to leave. It felt like she was trying to make me admit he'd walked away on purpose. But Marcus was happy. He loved his job, his family, our life. He wasn't running from anything. I told her that. That night, Morrison came back to camp and sat with me by the fire. Her face was pale. She told me something I'll never forget. This wasn't the first time. In the last 20 years, 6 men had gone missing from that same section of Crater Lake. All between 25 and 35. All hiking with someone else. All briefly separated. And all gone without a trace. Every case was the same. A bag or a jacket found. Search dogs refusing to continue. And no remains ever recovered. She said the native tribes who lived here long before the park existed refused to go near the lake except for sacred rituals. They believed the lake demanded offerings, that it took people who disrespected it. There were old stories of young men disappearing into the mountains, their spirits bound to the water forever. Morrison said she didn't believe in legends. Not exactly. But after 15 years working here, and seeing 3 disappearances herself, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. After 3 weeks, the official search ended. Marcus was declared a missing person. They had no leads, no evidence, and no idea what had happened. I went home to Seattle, hollow and numb. For months, I couldn't function. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was him. Every time I saw a hiker with a camera, I thought it was Marcus. A year later, I went back to Crater Lake. I don't know what I expected. Maybe closure, maybe a sign. I hiked the same trail, sat on the same rock where I'd last seen him. The view was beautiful, but it felt wrong. Too still, too empty. Then I felt it. That sensation of being watched. I looked toward the lake, and I swear I heard his voice. It was faint but clear, calling my name from the direction of the cliffs. My heart was pounding as I followed the sound. It always seemed just ahead, always a few steps farther. It led me to the edge of a cliff overlooking the water, and then it stopped. I looked down and saw something small glinting on a narrow ledge about 20 feet below. A ring box. I knew it instantly. Marcus had been planning to propose. That's why he'd gone off the trail, to find a private spot. That's why he'd been so excited that day. The rangers came and retrieved the box with climbing gear. It was Marcus's. His fingerprints were still on it. Inside was an engagement ring, and a note in his handwriting. Marisol, will you marry me? I love you more than anything in this world. The rangers were baffled. The ledge was sheer. No way he could have placed the box there and climbed back up. No signs of a fall, no disturbed soil, nothing. The box looked like someone had just set it there for me to find. I later reached out to other families whose loved ones had vanished from Crater Lake. Their stories were almost identical to mine. Each man had briefly separated from a group. Each left belongings behind, And in every case, something personal was found later in an impossible location. One woman told me her brother disappeared in 2009. 2 years later, she went back to the lake and heard him calling her name. The voice led her to a cave by the shoreline. Inside was his wallet, dry and clean as though it had just been placed there, even though it had supposedly been underwater for years. Marcus was officially declared dead in 2024, 7 years after he vanished. I signed the paperwork, but my heart refused to accept it. Because I've been back to that lake twice since then, and both times, I heard his voice again. Each time it led me somewhere new. Once to a trail he'd never hiked, once to a stretch of shoreline only reachable by boat. Each time, the same thing. His voice fading just as I got close. The Park Service denies everything. They say people get lost, that accidents happen, that the wilderness is unpredictable. But in over 2 decades, not a single one of those missing men has ever been found. Not one. I still have Marcus's ring. Sometimes I wear it. The note stays framed by my bed. I tell myself it keeps him close. But deep down, I think part of him is still there, beneath that impossible blue water, calling out, trapped in something ancient. There's a theory among the families of the missing. We've formed a small, quiet support group. We think Crater Lake isn't just a lake. It's something older, something alive. The tribes who once lived here knew that. They feared it. They believed some places are not meant for people, that the lake was a doorway, a place where the world above and something else below overlap. Crater Lake is the deepest lake in America, nearly 2,000 feet deep. No one truly knows what's at the bottom. Research teams have found submerged vents, underwater caves, even areas where sonar and cameras stop working. They say it's geological interference. Maybe. Or maybe it's something that doesn't want to be seen. Thousands of tourists visit every year. Most leave with perfect memories, photos of the water, quiet hikes, crisp mountain air. But not everyone comes back the same. Some report hearing voices. Some feel drawn to the lake in ways they can't explain. And a few, just a few, never come back at all. So, if you ever visit Crater Lake, remember this. Stay on the marked trails. Don't go off on your own. And if you hear someone calling your name from the direction of the water, don't answer. Because whatever lives in that lake doesn't give back what it takes. It keeps them. Forever. My name is Talon, and I make a living exploring abandoned and forgotten urban spaces. I've ventured into deserted hospitals, derelict subway tunnels, crumbling prisons, places most people would never dream of entering. I've witnessed unsettling scenes in my line of work. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the Portland-Shanghai tunnels back in 2018. That night changed everything I thought I knew about the limits of reality. And since then, I cannot bring myself to descend underground. Not into subway tunnels, not into basements, nowhere beneath the streets. I know now what waits in the darkness below. The Shanghai tunnels in Portland are infamous. A labyrinth of underground passages snakes beneath Old Town, linking the basements of old hotels, taverns, and warehouses to the waterfront. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, these tunnels were the site of a horrifying practice called Shanghaiing, the kidnapping of people, often through drugs or force, to be sold as crew members to ship captains. Countless individuals vanished into these passages, sailors, drifters, immigrants unlikely to be missed. Many awoke days later on ships in the middle of the Pacific, trapped in forced labor with no hope of escape. In 2018, I was in Portland for a photography project focused on urban decay. I heard about the Shanghai tunnels and learned that official, haunted tours ran through them. I signed up immediately, thinking it might be touristy and sanitized, but at least a chance to document the tunnels. The tour was scheduled for 8 p.m. on a Saturday. Our group consisted of 12 people, including me and the guide, a woman in her 50s named Rebecca, whose passion for the history of the tunnels was evident. Rebecca led us down a steep staircase from a bar in Old Town. The air shifted instantly as we descended. Cold, damp, heavy with a smell I couldn't quite place. Musty wood and mildew, with an undercurrent of metallic rot. The passageways were narrow, brick-lined with low ceilings. Rusted pipes dripped from overhead, creating small puddles on the floor. Our footsteps echoed in strange, uneven rhythms, as though the walls themselves were absorbing and distorting the sound. Rebecca narrated the history of Shanghaiing expertly, pointing out bars that once had trapdoors in the floors where unsuspecting victims were dumped into the tunnels below. She showed us the holding cells, tiny rooms carved into the tunnel walls, where captives might wait for days. Iron rings were embedded in the bricks where prisoners had been shackled. I was intrigued by the history, and my camera captured compelling shots of the passageways. But nothing yet seemed supernatural, just grim reminders of human cruelty. About 30 minutes into the tour, we arrived at a section Rebecca referred to as the holding cells. Small, dark cubicles where kidnapped individuals had been confined, sometimes sedated with opium to keep them compliant. As she spoke, I felt a touch on my shoulder. Not a casual brush, but deliberate pressure, fingers pressing firmly. I spun around. Nobody was there. The nearest person in the group was at least 5 feet away. I dismissed it as trick of the old building. Echoes, shifting air, imagination. Then I heard it. A faint, desperate whisper right beside my ear. "Help us." My blood froze. The voice was pleading, panicked. I glanced around at the group. No one else reacted. Everyone was focused on Rebecca, who was still recounting the history. We continued deeper into the tunnels. I let the group move ahead, pausing to photograph the intricate shadows and brickwork. But when I finally looked up, the group was gone. The passage curved, and they had vanished from sight. I called out, receiving no answer. Panic began to creep in as I walked faster, trying to catch up. But the tunnel split into 2 directions. I could not remember which path they had taken. I switched on my phone flashlight, realizing there was no signal, no GPS, just a thin cone of light illuminating the immediate tunnel. I chose the left branch and pressed forward, certain I would either reunite with the group or return to the entrance. But the tunnel shifted around me. The walls changed from familiar brick to rough stone, and equipment I had never seen before appeared along the walls. Rusted surgical instruments, metal trays, tables with leather restraints, and dozens of shackles bolted into the walls. Heavy footsteps echoed behind me. Multiple sets. I spun, expecting the tour group or security staff, but the corridor was empty. Still, the sound drew closer, heavier, more deliberate. I kept the phone light trained on the origin, and then I saw them. Shadows. Not ordinary shadows cast by a source of light, but moving, independent shapes. Human-like forms gliding along the walls, stretching out elongated arms toward me. Instinct took over. I ran blindly. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and the sight stopped me cold. Piles of clothing from different eras were stacked floor to ceiling. Shirts, pants, dresses, soiled, rotting, reeking of metallic decay and old blood. I pressed against the wall, trying to orient myself when the shadows surrounded me. They were no longer intangible. They had weight, substance. Cold, clammy hands grasped at my arms, chest, and face, forcing me down. I struggled, gasping for air, one hand over my mouth, others pinning me to the stone floor. And then I heard human voices. "Talon, where are you?" It was Rebecca. Instantly the shadows recoiled, melting back into the walls. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing. Rebecca and two other tour participants appeared in the doorway, pale and tense. "What are you doing here?" Rebecca asked. "This section has been sealed for decades. How did you get in?" I could not answer. There had been no visible entrance, no barrier, nothing to indicate the area was off limits. Rebecca insisted the tunnel had been bricked up decades earlier and showed me a map confirming it. Where I had been standing should have been inaccessible. The tour ended abruptly. Rebecca called for assistance, and we were escorted back to the surface. The other participants were confused and irritated, but I was shaken. My arms and face bore deep scratches I hadn't noticed before, and my clothes smelled of the chamber, of old blood and decay. Before we left, Rebecca pulled me aside. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. I recounted the shadows, the hands, the piles of clothing. She nodded slowly, as though this was a story she had heard before. "That area was used for more than just holding kidnapped sailors," she explained. "It became a disposal site. People who died down there, from illness, withdrawal, or neglect, were never recovered. Their bodies were piled up in hidden chambers and sealed off. Over 200 remain in the walls and floors beneath the city." In the days that followed, I researched everything I could about the tunnels. The documented history was grim enough. Thousands abducted, sold into forced labor. But unofficial records painted an even darker picture. Long-forgotten newspapers hinted at underground medical experiments, disgraced doctors performing unauthorized surgeries on captives, testing early anesthetics, experimenting with amputations and rudimentary lab procedures. The chamber I had found, stacked with clothing, corresponded to historical images of similar discoveries from the early 1900s. Each garment representing a life lost, a body never recovered, a soul denied rest. Accounts from other explorers and paranormal investigators revealed similar experiences. Separation from groups, discovery of sealed sections, encounters with shadowy figures, unseen physical attacks. Some investigators were hospitalized. Others quit the field entirely, unwilling to speak of what they encountered. The photographs I captured that night were unsettling. Most appeared normal, empty tunnels, decayed equipment, but in several frames, faint human faces emerged in the background, semi-transparent, ghostly, but unmistakably human. Analysts who specialize in debunking paranormal photography could not explain them. The faces appeared in multiple images in impossible positions, impossible angles, impossible distances. I have not entered an underground space since that night. Attempting to step into a subway a month later triggered a full panic attack. The metallic, decaying scent returned. Phantom hands pressed against me, and I fled immediately. My career as an urban explorer ended that day. Most of the spaces I sought to document are below ground. I cannot face them. Worse, the dreams continue. Almost nightly, I am back in that chamber, encircled by shadows and hands pressed down into the floor. In the dreams, I am never rescued. The shadows pull me further into the walls, and I become one of them, a trapped, restless soul in the tunnels, reaching for anyone who comes near, desperate for release. The Shanghai tunnels remain accessible today. Tours run weekly, attracting hundreds of visitors to Old Town. Many experience nothing unusual, but some encounter what I did, and some never fully return. If you ever find yourself in Portland, the Shanghai tunnels will likely be recommended as a tourist attraction. The tours are considered safe. But heed this warning. Stay with your group, do not stray, and do not respond to voices asking for help. The entities down there, the lost, trapped, forgotten, are not seeking rescue. They seek companionship in eternal darkness. And once the tunnels mark you, they do not release their hold. My name is Raylan, and for most of my adult life, I've made my living uncovering truths that others have long given up on. I'm a private investigator, specializing in cold cases, missing persons, unresolved homicides, and mysteries that have faded into the dusty archives of forgotten police files. For 15 years, I've followed dead-end leads, dug through lies, and stared into the bleakest corners of human nature. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I believed every puzzle could be solved with enough logic, persistence, and luck. But in 2020, I accepted a case that shattered that belief. One tied to the legend of D.B. Cooper, the man who pulled off the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. What I uncovered convinced me that Cooper didn't die in the jump. He lived. And he lived right here, in Oregon. For anyone unfamiliar with the story, here's the condensed version. On November 24, 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He was polite, calm, and carrying a briefcase containing what he claimed was a bomb. During the flight, he passed a note to a flight attendant demanding $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. The airline complied when the plane landed in Seattle. Once his demands were met, Cooper released the passengers and instructed the crew to fly south toward Mexico City at a low altitude and reduced speed. Somewhere above the forests of the Pacific Northwest, he opened the rear stairs of the Boeing 727, strapped the money to his body, and leapt into the night. He was never found. Despite one of the largest manhunts in FBI history, no conclusive trace of Cooper, no body, no parachute, no verified money, was ever recovered. The case grew cold, fossilized into folklore. Then came a phone call that pulled me into the story. The woman on the line introduced herself as Patricia. Her grandfather had recently died at 93, and during his final days, delirious with dementia, he had begun saying strange things. He spoke about helping a man who fell from the sky, a man with a bag full of money who needed to vanish forever. The family dismissed it as confused rambling, until, while cleaning out his old barn, Patricia discovered something that made her blood run cold. That's when she called me. When I arrived at her property, a remote stretch of woodland in rural Oregon, about 40 miles southeast of Portland, right in the suspected drop zone, Patricia led me to the barn. Beneath a loose section of the wooden floor was a false compartment. Inside, wrapped in layers of old canvas, were several items. A rotted parachute, a tattered suit jacket bearing fibers matching Northwest Orient Airlines uniforms, and a handwritten note containing latitude and longitude coordinates. I took photos, logged everything, and ran the coordinates. They led to a secluded area deep in Mount Hood National Forest, roughly 30 miles from where we stood. Patricia told me her grandfather had lived alone there most of his life. An isolated man known for being gruff and private, but also for occasionally helping strangers who needed quiet favors. He distrusted the government and avoided small talk, but his reputation was that of someone who could make problems disappear. For the right kind of people. Despite the isolation, I decided to check out the coordinates. I went alone, a decision I'd come to regret. The forest swallowed me for hours. The underbrush was thick and the ground slick with moss. After 3 hours of hiking, I came upon a small clearing, just large enough for a campsite. There was a circle of stones, the remains of an old fire pit, and fragments of rotted wood that might once have formed a crude shelter. But what caught my attention was something partially buried near the center of the clearing. I started digging with the folding shovel from my pack. A few feet down, I hit something hard. A metal military-grade container, sealed tight. Inside were several bundles of $20 bills, weathered and water-damaged but unmistakable. I checked the serial numbers on the visible bills, cross-referencing them with the FBI's published list of Cooper's ransom money. They matched. Also inside were fake identification cards, each bearing a different name but the same photograph. A man in his 40s, dark hair, steady gaze, a hint of confidence. He looked nothing like the famous FBI sketch of D.B. Cooper. I was still kneeling there, hands shaking, when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching through the trees. My first thought was a hiker or a ranger. But when I looked up, I saw an elderly man, perhaps in his late 70s, standing at the edge of the clearing. He wore simple hiking clothes and leaned on a walking stick. His expression was calm, almost relieved. "You found my insurance policy," he said. My pulse spiked. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "You already know who I am, or at least who I used to be." He claimed to be D.B. Cooper. At first I thought he was another fraud, one of the dozens who'd falsely confessed to being Cooper over the years. But as he spoke, my skepticism crumbled. He knew classified details that were never released publicly. He described the layout of the aircraft, the way the stairs sounded as they lowered mid-flight, the texture of the parachute fabric, and even a modification he made to ensure one chute deployed correctly, something that only the FBI's internal case notes mentioned. He told me the composite sketch was wrong on purpose. He'd worn prosthetics, a wig, and makeup to distort his features before boarding the plane. The man in the drawing, he said, was never real. He recounted the hijacking as if it were a meticulously executed business deal. He had studied flight patterns, altitude maps, and wind speeds for months. He knew the precise window of descent and had arranged for help on the ground. People who lived off-grid, people like Patricia's grandfather. According to him, when he landed, injured but alive, her grandfather found him, hid him, and nursed him back to health. In exchange, Cooper gave him a cut of the ransom and promised to vanish forever. For nearly 5 decades, he had lived under assumed identities, drifting from one Oregon town to another, working odd jobs, and staying invisible. When I asked why he was confessing now, he sighed. "I'm dying," he said. "Cancer. The real kind. I've got half a year left. I just don't want to die pretending anymore." He offered me a deal. If I left the evidence where it was and walked away, he would tell me everything. Every secret, every step of the hijacking, every detail of how he fooled the world. I refused. I told him I would report everything to the FBI. That's when his eyes changed. He stepped toward me, fast and angry. Despite his age, he was strong, fueled by desperation. He grabbed for the container. We struggled, brief, violent, chaotic. I managed to wrench it free and run, sprinting through the forest until my lungs burned. When I dared to look back, he wasn't chasing me. He stood in the clearing, staring after me. "I've vanished before," he called out. "I can do it again." I drove straight to the nearest FBI field office and handed over everything. The photos, the coordinates, my statement. The agents were cautious but intrigued. They launched an immediate investigation. When they reached the barn, the hidden compartment was empty. When they searched the clearing, the container was gone. No money, no IDs, no trace. Everything I'd found had been erased as if it had never existed. The FBI analyzed my photos but said they could have been staged. They interviewed Patricia, but she had no additional evidence. Her grandfather's past was a mystery. His records were minimal, and his few acquaintances were long dead. With nothing physical to prove my claims, the Bureau shelved the report. My reputation as an investigator took the hit. Some colleagues called it a hoax. Potential clients stopped calling. Patricia's family cut off contact completely, afraid of being dragged into the conspiracy. But I know what I saw. I know that man existed. And I know he was telling the truth. Over the next few years, I dug deeper. I found 3 other families in Washington and Oregon, whose elderly relatives had made similar deathbed confessions. Stories of a wounded man with cash who needed to disappear in 1971. Each family lived within the suspected landing zone. Each described the same kind of arrangement. Help him vanish. No questions asked. The FBI had officially closed the Cooper case in 2016, but I discovered through leaked memos that it had been quietly reopened twice. Once in 2018, again in 2021, after receiving new, undisclosed tips. I believe those tips were linked to sightings of the same man I met. DNA testing on the trace material I handled from the cache revealed an unknown male profile, one that doesn't match any existing criminal or civilian database. The FBI keeps it on file, but without a suspect to compare it to, it's just another cold trail. They've asked me repeatedly whether I could recognize the man if I saw him again. Yes, I told them every time. I'd never forget those eyes. But deep down, I know I never will. He's gone. Either dead from the cancer he mentioned or vanished once more, as he promised. I think about that day often. How close I came to solving America's greatest unsolved crime. How the truth was right there in my hands, and how quickly it slipped away. I remember his calm expression, his voice steady when he said, "I can disappear again." He wasn't bluffing. He had done it once and could do it again. Today, the D.B. Cooper case remains one of the most infamous mysteries in FBI history. Documentaries, podcasts, books, all recycling the same tired theories. Most believe Cooper died in the jump. The official narrative says he didn't survive the fall. But I know better. He survived. He landed in Oregon. He built a life in the shadows, surrounded by people who prized freedom over law. Maybe you've seen him. An old man who keeps to himself, pays in cash, and never talks about his past. Maybe he was your neighbor. Maybe he's still out there now, living under another name, quietly smiling at the thought that the world still hasn't caught him. The evidence is gone. The witnesses are silent. The truth, once within reach, has dissolved into legend. But I'll never forget what he said before I ran. His voice calm, steady, almost amused. "I've disappeared before. I can do it again." And somewhere in the endless woods of Oregon, I believe he did. My name is Dakota, and I've been exploring the backcountry since I was a kid. 11 years old when I first shouldered a pack and stepped off into the wild. Since then, I've spent over 500 nights under open skies across North America. I've outrun bears, huddled through lightning storms on ridgelines, forded rivers in chest-deep current, and pushed through conditions that would make most turn back. I thought I knew what danger looked like. I thought I understood wilderness. I was wrong. There are things in the mountains that aren't in any survival manual. Things that think, hunt, and move with purpose. I learned that lesson on Mount Hood. It was August 2019. I had mapped out a 5-day solo loop through Mount Hood National Forest, a route I'd done parts of before, secluded, scenic, and almost always empty. I wanted peace and solitude. I figured I'd see maybe a handful of other hikers the whole trip. The first 2 days were perfect: blue skies, calm winds, quiet forests. I met exactly 2 people on the trail, both heading the opposite direction. On the third evening, I made camp near a small stream, pitched my tent, and turned in around 9. Somewhere close to midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not the distant shuffle of a deer or elk, but slow, heavy steps. Close enough that I could feel the vibration through the ground. They circled my tent, each crunch deliberate, unhurried. I froze, listening. The pattern continued, around and around, then stopped directly in front of my tent door. I heard breathing, deep, controlled, almost human in rhythm, but too loud, too heavy. My heart hammered. Against every instinct, I unzipped the tent just an inch and peeked out. The moon was bright enough to cast silhouettes across the clearing. And there it was, 15 feet away. A figure. Upright. Massive. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its proportions were wrong for a man. Too broad, too thick through the shoulders. It stood there motionless, as if watching. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe a prank, a trick of the light. But the thing shifted slightly, and I saw the fluid, natural movement of a living creature. It wasn't wearing anything. It wasn't a costume. I zipped the tent back up and gripped the knife I kept by my side. The circling resumed. For hours it paced, paused, breathed, and moved again. Around 3 in the morning, the sound faded, footsteps receding into the trees. I didn't sleep. I waited, rigid and alert, until the first streak of dawn hit the canopy. When daylight came, I stepped outside and surveyed the ground. What I found froze me solid. Footprints. Dozens of them, 14 inches long, 6 inches wide, each with distinct toes pressed deep into the dirt. The stride length was enormous, 5 feet apart. Impossible for a human without running. The depth of the impressions suggested something immensely heavy. I followed the tracks for maybe 50 yards before they stopped abruptly. Mid-stride, as if the creature had simply evaporated. Every instinct told me to pack up and leave. But another part of me, a stubborn, curious part, wanted answers. I told myself it was about gathering evidence, about understanding. Maybe it was pride. So I stayed another night. That 4th day, I scouted the surrounding area. I found broken branches 8 feet up in the trees, large areas where brush had been flattened, and odd claw marks on bark. Whatever had been there moved with strength and intelligence. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, I returned to camp uneasy, but determined to face whatever came. It returned after dark, but it wasn't alone. This time I heard multiple sets of movement, approaching from different directions. 3, maybe 4 distinct sources. Their sounds weren't random. They communicated. Short bursts of clicking, low grunts, and strange stuttering chirps. It wasn't any animal I knew. It sounded coordinated, like signals passed between hunters. They circled the perimeter, never coming closer than a few yards, but always moving, always probing. I heard something brush the fabric of my tent once, testing it, feeling it. My pulse roared in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Hours passed before the noises gradually thinned, fading back into the forest. By sunrise, my nerves were shredded. It was the final day of my trip, and I wasted no time breaking camp. As I lifted my pack, I noticed long slashes across the back panel. 4 deep gouges, parallel and clean, as though claws had raked through the nylon. I hadn't noticed them the night before. The realization hit me hard. Whatever those things were, they'd been closer than I thought. If they'd wanted to, they could have ended me. I hiked non-stop until I reached the trailhead by mid-afternoon. At the ranger station, I reported everything. Footprints, noises, the figures, the claw marks. I showed them the photos I'd taken. The rangers exchanged looks I didn't expect. Not disbelief, but unease. One of them, a grizzled man named Sam who'd been with the Forest Service for 30 years, pulled me aside after the others walked off. "You got lucky," he said quietly. "Most don't." I asked what he meant. Sam hesitated, then told me about the missing hikers. 23 over the last 4 decades. Most were experienced, solo backpackers. Most vanished without a trace. Officially, they were listed as lost, drowned, or injured. Unofficially, the rangers had another theory. They believed there was something living deep in Mount Hood's wilderness. Not exactly Bigfoot, something different, smarter, meaner. Not reclusive, but territorial. Not shy, but organized. He said some rangers had seen them, 3 in total. 2 quit immediately afterward. The 3rd stayed, but never again patrolled the deep forest. That man, Sam said, described looking one straight in the eye and feeling unmistakable intelligence staring back. It wasn't an animal, he told me. It was something else. Sam opened a folder, unmarked, unofficial, and flipped through it. Inside were decades of notes, photos of footprints, field reports, search logs, all consistent. Hikers gone missing. Equipment shredded or scattered miles from trails. Descriptions of sounds, clicks, whistles, chatter, always in the same remote sections of Mount Hood. They hunt in groups, Sam said. They know the terrain better than we do. They watch. They wait. They pick people off one by one. Never groups, always singles. I asked why no one had gone public, why there weren't warnings or investigations. He gave a tired smile. Because there's no proof that would hold up anywhere. No bodies, no clear footage. No way to convince anyone without sounding insane. And if we did admit it, the forest would flood with armed hunters and thrill seekers. People would get hurt. Maybe worse. I left that station shaken to my core. The clawed pack on my shoulders was the only tangible proof of what I'd survived. and it wasn't nearly enough to convince anyone who hadn't been there. My family thought I'd had a brush with a bear. My friends joked about Bigfoot. But I knew better. I had seen intelligence behind that shadow. I had heard strategy in their movement. Since then, I haven't gone back to Mount Hood. I can't. Every time I'm alone in the woods, I hear phantom footsteps circling in my mind. I see tall silhouettes standing in the trees just out of light. I've talked to others who claim similar encounters. 3 that I know of personally. All lived through it. None walked away the same. One was an ex-soldier who told me nothing in combat compared to the fear he felt that night. Another was a wildlife biologist who said the creature's coordination defied every known animal behavior model. The third was a ranger. He quit after a night patrol ended with something stalking him for miles, always just beyond the beam of his flashlight. The disappearances haven't stopped. 3 more solo hikers have gone missing in the Mount Hood wilderness since my encounter. Men in their 20s to 40s, all experienced, all traveling alone. Their gear was found, but not their bodies. The official story is accidents, exposure, or animal attack. But the rangers know better. If you ever plan to hike in Mount Hood, take this advice. Never go alone. Stay on established trails. Don't camp far from others. And if, after nightfall, you hear slow, deliberate footsteps outside your tent, do not unzip that door. Don't call out. Don't try to reason with the dark. Whatever roams those woods is not a myth, not a story for campfires. It's real. It's watching. And it's hunting. Mount Hood keeps its secrets well. The forest is vast, ancient, and patient. And the things that live there have learned to be too. My name is Sienna, and I'm a paranormal investigator who spent over a decade studying hauntings and phenomena that defy scientific explanation. For 12 years, I've chased whispers in the dark, the echoes of what shouldn't exist. I've investigated more than 100 haunted sites across America, capturing voices on EVP, thermal images of human shapes, and movements caught on camera that no one could logically explain. But experience taught me skepticism. Not every bump in the night is a ghost. I dissect evidence, challenge assumptions, and always look for a rational cause before invoking the supernatural. That said, there's one place that destroyed my sense of logic. One location that altered how I view everything I do. That place is Hot Lake Hotel, an infamous relic of Eastern Oregon, and it remains the most disturbing encounter of my life. Hot Lake Hotel stands in the quiet town of Hot Lake, Oregon. It was originally built in 1864, designed as a grand resort and mineral spa, drawing the wealthy to its natural hot springs. The building was enormous, with elegant staircases, ornate woodwork, and wide verandas where guests once lounged in luxury. But in the early 1900s, its purpose changed. It became a sanatorium, a place where doctors experimented on the desperate and the dying. Patients came from all over, those suffering from tuberculosis, alcoholism, addiction, and mental illness. The treatments were experimental, untested, and often fatal. In 2016, a research collective invited me to investigate the property. The structure had been abandoned for decades, its walls silent except for the whispers of legend. A new owner had purchased it with plans to reopen as a hotel. But before they welcomed guests, they wanted answers, or perhaps reassurance. I agreed. My team consisted of 2 trusted investigators, both veterans of high-activity cases. We arrived just as the sunset burned orange behind the mountains that October evening. From the outside, the hotel looked like something suspended between life and death, partly renovated, but still scarred by time. Some sections had electricity and new paint, but others were sealed off, untouched since the 1970s. The owners handed us a skeleton key and said we could access everything, even the old surgical wing and the burn ward, the latter destroyed in a 1934 fire that claimed numerous lives. We began setting up our gear at 10 p.m. EMF detectors, digital voice recorders, infrared cameras, and thermal sensors. We spread out across the surgical corridor first, the area rumored to be the most active. Almost instantly, the meters began reacting. The readings spiked and dipped as though responding to questions. Is someone here? Spike. Were you a patient? Spike. Were you hurt? A long, sustained surge that made the detectors hum. Then the temperature dropped. A 20-degree plunge in a matter of minutes. The HVAC system was modern, and we hadn't touched it. The air felt heavier, colder, charged. I started an EVP session, asking aloud for anyone present to make contact. My partner Marcus suggested we move to the burn ward, the wing destroyed in that tragic blaze where patients, locked in their rooms, burned alive. I hesitated but agreed. We moved down a narrow corridor that twisted toward the back of the building. The deeper we went, the colder it became until we could see our breath hanging in the air. Crossing the threshold into the burn ward was like stepping into another reality. The air thickened, difficult to breathe, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of charred flesh. It was faint at first, then overwhelming. We all smelled it. A scent that had no right to exist after nearly a century. I set up the camera. Marcus switched on the thermal imager. The EMF detectors began to scream, their lights pulsing wildly. I asked, "If someone can hear us, please show us that you're here. We want to tell your story." That's when the chaos began. The camera slid across the floor on its own, scraping against tile. Sarah reached to grab it, and it flew from her hands as if yanked by invisible force. Marcus stumbled backward, shoved by nothing we could see. My body shook with adrenaline, but I kept filming. Through the thermal camera, I could see figures, cold shapes shaped like humans, moving deliberately around us. They weren't heat signatures. They were voids, silhouettes colder than their surroundings. Moments later, they became visible. Not the translucent ghosts we see in movies, but shadowed forms, burned and scarred, their clothing tattered, their bodies warped. The apparitions of the fire's victims had taken form, replaying their torment. One of them advanced toward Sarah. She threw up her hands instinctively and a second later screamed in pain. When I turned the flashlight on her, red, blistering handprints covered her forearms. Burns that hadn't been there seconds earlier. The pain made her tremble. Whatever touched her had left a physical mark. "Get out!" I shouted. We scrambled to pack up our gear, but before we could reach the exit, the doors slammed shut behind us. The sound was deafening, metal on metal. We tried everything, pulling, kicking, even using a crowbar, but the doors wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped even lower, and the air filled with the smell of smoke and ash. 15 minutes passed like hours. Then, as suddenly as they'd sealed, the doors swung open on their own. We didn't hesitate. We ran, our equipment clattering in our arms. We didn't stop until we reached the main lobby, panting, shaking, terrified. The hotel's owners found us there, pale and trembling. When we explained what had happened, they exchanged knowing looks instead of disbelief. They admitted we weren't the first team to experience it. Other groups had reported similar violent encounters, and one team, only a month before us, had left 2 investigators hospitalized after their session in the same ward. Back home, I spent days reviewing the footage. The thermal recordings showed multiple entities moving in patterns, pacing, circling, approaching. The EVP playback contained voices screaming, begging, crying for help. Objects could be seen shifting by themselves in the videos, but what chilled me most appeared in the background of several clips. Under certain lighting, faint and translucent, you could see surgical instruments moving through the air, scalpels slicing, clamps tightening, as if reenacting procedures on invisible patients. Blood appeared and vanished. Shadows of men in lab coats hovered over unseen tables. It wasn't just haunting. It was history bleeding through the present. Sarah's burn marks lasted 3 days. She described the pain as still burning from the inside, though doctors found no medical cause. Afterward, she quit paranormal investigation for good. She refuses to discuss that night, even with me. I couldn't let it go. I dove into the history of Hot Lake Sanatorium. Through old records, I discovered that the facility had performed over 1,200 unauthorized medical procedures, lobotomies, amputations, shock therapies, often without anesthesia. The death rate exceeded 90%. Patients were subjected to horrific experiments under the guise of treatment. The 1934 fire had started during one of those experiments. A doctor, obsessed with curing mental illness through electrical stimulation, had wired patients to crude equipment. A spark caught in the oxygen lines, setting the ward ablaze. 17 patients were trapped, locked inside as flames consumed them. Staff escaped, but the patients didn't. The ward became a furnace. Years later, that energy, that terror, still clings to the building. I've tried to return to Hot Lake several times since, seeking answers, but the owners always refuse. They say no further investigations will be permitted. According to them, every attempt to communicate with the dead made the activity worse, more aggressive, more unpredictable. They reopened the hotel to the public anyway. Guests began to share their own accounts. Unexplained burns, objects moving, apparitions in mirrors, and voices whispering in locked rooms. Employees quit abruptly, some after only a few days, claiming the building didn't want people there. The haunting hasn't faded, it's intensified. I believe the souls trapped inside that hotel are not peaceful spirits but echoes of rage, the suffering of people who died in pain and betrayal, bound to the place of their torment. They relive their agony over and over, lashing out at anyone who dares enter. Hot Lake Hotel is open today, its website boasting historic charm and healing hot springs. Tourists visit, take photos, even sleep in its rooms. Most leave without incident, but some don't. Some leave with marks, injuries, or a silence that lasts a lifetime. I haven't set foot there since that night in 2016. I can't. What I witnessed there stripped away the line between the living and the dead. Some places are not just haunted. They are alive in their suffering, sentient, malevolent. If you ever pass through Oregon and see the sign for Hot Lake Hotel, I'm warning you. Do not go inside. Do not enter that burn ward. Do not speak to the air or invite whatever lingers there to show itself. Some entities are beyond rescue, and some truths are too dark to uncover. Hot Lake Hotel remembers. It breathes with the pain of every patient who screamed within its walls. And it waits for the next person curious enough to listen to the voices that never stop screaming. My name is Alara, and I am a marine biologist who studies the intricate ecosystems that exist beneath the waves along the Oregon coast. I spend most of my life near the ocean, on boats, in diving gear, or standing knee-deep in tide pools. I've logged over 20 years of fieldwork, tracking species, observing marine patterns, and surviving weather that would terrify most people. I've seen wrecks buried in sand, dolphins tangled in nets, and storms so violent they seemed alive. But nothing, not science, not logic, could prepare me for what I encountered near Cape Lookout. There is something off that coast that cannot be explained by biology or physics. Something that reveals itself only during the blackest nights of winter storms, when the ocean feels angry and ancient. It's not a legend, though locals whisper about it in bars and marinas. It's something I've seen and documented myself. It happened in January 2021. I was stationed at Cape Lookout State Park, gathering data for a project tracking gray whale migration. A fierce Pacific storm had raged for days, filling the air with salt and electricity. Winds screamed through the trees, and the surf pounded like artillery. Most of the park had been evacuated, but I stayed behind in a small cabin overlooking the beach. My equipment couldn't wait. The data I needed depended on how the whales reacted to chaos. At around 2 a.m. on January 15th, I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't the wind or crashing surf. It was a low, straining groan, like ancient wood under immense pressure. I got up and went to the window. The darkness outside was almost complete except for the split-second flashes of lightning that illuminated the sea. The waves towered high, breaking with a ferocity that shook the ground. And in that chaos, I saw lights. At first, I thought it must be a fishing vessel caught in the storm. But something was off. The glow was too soft, too amber, flickering like lanterns instead of modern floodlights. And when another flash of lightning tore through the sky, I saw the ship clearly. A massive, three-masted vessel, the kind that hadn't sailed in centuries. It looked like something from the 1600s or 1700s, its sails straining against impossible winds, wooden hull glistening with spray. I stood frozen, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. No modern ship could look like that. No modern captain would attempt to navigate a storm like this under sail alone. I threw on a coat, grabbed my binoculars and camera, and stumbled outside into the storm. The wind was merciless, nearly toppling me. The rain stung like shards of ice, but I pushed forward to the beach, determined to get a better view. Through the roaring surf and darkness, the ship loomed closer, moving straight toward the jagged rocks beneath the cliffs. I raised my camera and began snapping photos, my hands trembling from cold and fear. My heart pounded as I realized what was about to happen. The ship wasn't slowing down. It was going to crash. I tried calling the Coast Guard, but my phone displayed no signal. I was powerless to do anything except watch. The ship slammed into the rocks with a crack that echoed through the storm. A deafening thunderclap that should have shattered its hull. But instead of splintering, the ship passed through the stone as if the rocks weren't real. One moment it was there. The next it was gliding through the cliffs. And then it was gone. No debris, no wreckage, no sign that it had ever existed. Soaked and trembling, I stumbled back to the cabin and checked my camera. The photos were there, blurred, grainy, nearly indecipherable, but unmistakable. They showed the shape of a ship from another century, glowing faintly as it slipped through solid rock. I spent the rest of the night combing through maritime archives online, searching for any record of similar sightings or old wrecks near Cape Lookout. After hours of research, I found a reference to a ship called the Lupata, a Dutch merchant vessel that supposedly wrecked somewhere along the Oregon coast in 1693. 72 crew members were reported lost. The ship's exact resting place was never found, and the event was almost completely erased from history. Some historians speculated that the ship had been carrying illegal cargo, which might explain why the Dutch East India Company had tried to wipe it from their records. When I shared my photos with experts, most dismissed them, calling them lens flares or digital errors. But one woman, Dr. Margaret Chen, a maritime historian specializing in Dutch colonial trade, contacted me immediately. She told me the Lupata's story went much deeper. It wasn't just a merchant ship. It had secretly been a slave ship, carrying over 200 enslaved Africans bound for the East Indies. The vessel had gone off course during a violent storm and struck rocks off Cape Lookout. The hatches had been sealed. None of those trapped below deck survived. Their bodies were never recovered. Their deaths never recorded. Dr. Chen explained that reports of a ghost ship off the Oregon coast date back over 2 centuries. Fishermen, sailors, even Coast Guard officers have described seeing the same vision. A tall, 3-masted ship glowing faintly in the dark, gliding straight into the rocks before disappearing. Every sighting occurred during winter storms, always at night, always near Cape Lookout. She believed that what I had seen was a psychic echo, a replay of the trauma endured by those who died aboard the Lupata. A tragedy so immense it had scarred the very sea. I have since returned to Cape Lookout 11 times. 8 of those nights, I have seen the Lupata again. Always during a storm, always following the same path toward the rocks. Each time I can make out shapes on deck. Transparent figures moving frantically, raising their arms in silent cries for help. Every attempt I've made to film it has failed. My equipment shorts out. The footage corrupts. The audio fills with static. It's as if the ship rejects being recorded, existing only for the living eye. A vision meant to be witnessed, not captured. Over time, I've spoken with others who've seen it. A Coast Guard officer whose report was buried. A fisherman who quit the sea entirely. A photographer whose images mysteriously vanished after submission. Dr. Chen and I continue to document every sighting, every fragment of history we can recover. We've confirmed the names of 243 enslaved people who perished aboard the Lupata. Souls erased from official record, denied even a grave. Now I believe the ship reappears not to frighten but to demand remembrance. To remind us of the horror buried beneath commerce, of lives stolen and silenced. The Lupata is not a haunting. It's a message. If you ever find yourself on the Oregon coast during a violent winter storm, and you see faint amber lights drifting through the fog, look closely. You might be witnessing the Lupata, eternally sailing toward the rocks, forever drowning, forever calling to a world that has long forgotten them. They are still waiting for someone to finally see them.